One thing not talked about enough in military collecting circles, historical circles, and reenactment circles is the footwear of the soldier during the war. Many times throughout conflict, it is easy to overlook exactly what went on the soldier's feet. And if you've done a lot of hiking, walking around, or just basically worn a new pair of shoes, you know how important it is to have a pair of shoes that fit and is comfortable and can get the job done right. This was extremely important for armies which mainly operated with marching and walking to the front and through enemy territory. Now, I've been lucky enough to be expanding my collection, and one item that I got was a pair of officers' jackboots, German jackboots from the First World War. They're model 1866, and while not exactly like those of the enlisted man, they are extremely cool to see and will match up nicely with my brand new mannequin setup that I've got going on here from the Franco-Prussian War. Now, I'm going to be doing an unboxing here right after the introduction and everything like that. I'll be going over the differences between these boots and the enlisted man's boots, or the Marschentiefel 1866. Apologies for pronouncing that wrong. And I'll just be giving a brief overview of how important it is to get the boots right with reenactment, why it's interesting how we tend to overlook the importance of jack boots and the differences between the different nations and their footwear, and why we should start to focus more and more on these rather uncommon pieces. I'm the Wolf of 1918, and welcome to a Militaria unboxing video as well as a Militaria discussion with some reenactment stuff thrown in there. Now, onto the unboxing. I just received this today. I bought it off eBay. I will go ahead and link the seller in the description below. He's got some pretty cool stuff. Great seller, easy to work with, no problems there. Also, for those of you who are wondering where the heck I got the Hussar uniform and the lance, I'll also be linking to those sellers in the description below, as the one who sold me the lance was extremely nice, answered some of my ridiculous questions about maybe if he'd accept a better offer even though that wasn't an option. And the dude who sold me the Hussar uniform is just, his place is pretty great too. So I figured it'd go to waste if I didn't share those, especially since a lot of you guys are looking to expand your collections. And those three places for this and those two would be great places to start to look around, since they're not priced bad and you could probably get some good deals there if you're lucky, like I have been able to. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at what these look like. I've only seen the images on eBay, so I'm not too sure how exactly the quality is going to be on these, and my opinion of the seller of these boots might change if I open it up and they are completely garbage. I've also never actually physically held a pair of original boots from the First World War. So we're going to see how that goes. And this cord's getting in the way, so alrighty. Now unfortunately I don't have two cameras, so I can't set it up to where I can give you guys a top-down view. But I will be able to go ahead and give a brief overview of it in post, give some nice camera shots of the boots while I talk over them so you guys don't have to look at my face the entire time. So, some bubble wrap, or what are these other little packets, important. The boots aren't fragile, but it is important to keep them from getting squished, as that'll ruin the leather, and I have no idea what the condition is of this leather. So, here's boot number one. Oh, look at that. So the seller was nice enough to go ahead and fill it with newspaper to keep its shape. So that is a very awesome thing for the seller. Huge bonus points to that. Now these are definitely interesting. So something else interesting about these boots is that they have actually been reinforced in the back, and I'll go ahead and show a picture of that, for spurs, according to someone that basically pointed these boots out to me as an option for adding them to my collection. That is boot number one. Boot number two. Now these are officer's boots, and I'll get into the differences in just a second. And there's boot number two. Now, I'm going to go ahead and move this, make sure there's no papers or anything that is necessary. Oh, almost hit the machine gun there. everything appears to be in good order. Really well packaged. A lot of paper, but that'll hold their shape enough. So here are the pair of officer's boots. Now there's a little bit of repair work down here, which is kind of cool to see. It's definitely from the time period, and it's actually pretty cool to just sort of have a bit of repair work done on that. I need to get a better setup with my microphone, so the sound quality's been inconsistent, and I apologize. Now some of the stitching on this back reinforcement seems to be giving out, which is definitely unfortunate, but these are very cool looking boots. They're very tall. They're taller than I expected them to be, but they are officer boots, and officer boots were definitely taller than the enlisted man boots, as they were meant to give the uniform a more polished look to it. As the taller the jack boot, effectively, when it got up to the knees, it started to look a lot, I don't know. There's something about the aesthetic of that just starts to look really cool when it starts to, the higher the jack boots are up to a certain point. So these are them. Now, let me go ahead and get into the discussion of just like these boots specifically and the importance of footwear during the First World War and the differences that each nation took. Brandon F. has done a very well done video on the differences between boots. I actually linked it in my video about the puttees. He talks about the differences that nations did and some of the benefits of puttees versus having jack boots like these. Now, one of the main things that I find interesting about Germany is the way that they planned their military was extremely intelligent in terms of their planning for the future. Their military was planned around the idea of quick marches with very little logistical support. The soldiers were given enough rations for a couple of days without logistical support, and they were given these rations on the idea that as they're advancing, they'd be able to take food from the locals, whether that was by pillaging, which was still rather common at the time for an invading army to do, in terms of like not razing the town to the ground like they did in Belgium, but in the terms of, hey, they're going through a town in France and they need bread. So the military is going to confiscate the bread from the people and give it to the soldiers because they need it. This was a common practice for invading armies, mostly done by the Germans and the Austrians during the war, to some extent the Russians when they were invading Galicia, and that was mainly because the other nations didn't really have the chance to invade an area with such populations. So I say all that to say, the Germans, with their intelligent planning around their kits, around their logistics, around their economy in terms of planning for in case they get their supplies cut off, they did not plan ahead very well for their leather problem that they did face during the war. See, Germany on the outset was importing most of their leather that they needed for domestic use, military use, or anything really, and yet a lot of their kit was leather, on contrast with the British kit, which was not very leather reliant at all, even though they could be. Right here I have, and I didn't plan for this, but I have ammo pouches, German ammo pouches from World War I. They are both made out of leather. One of them is made in 1916, middle of the war, and they're still making them out of leather. The belt that is right here, 1914 made belt, made out of leather. This one is actually, I think this ammo pouch is made in 1914, made out of leather. This is an early model tornister, a lot of leather and actually made out of pony fur as well. Right here I've got the gas mask that was made in the late war, made out of leather. They used a lot of leather for their items. The gas mask was a necessity, but a lot of these other ones were just niceties because, well, it looks cool. It looks good. It looks uniform and polished. I say all that to say that they used a lot of leather on their kit for a nation that doesn't create much leather domestically and one that is really intelligent when it comes to how it sets up its army logistically. It seemed almost idiotic to go off and then use boots that require more leather. Low boots do not require as much leather as jack boots do, as it can be kind of easy to see. Low boots do take a little bit more time to manufacture due to the more meticulous stuff you have to do right here for the, the shoestrings. I don't know why I could not get that word out of my mouth. But the Germans didn't just issue jack boots. They also issued a pair of low boots to each soldier for when they're on leave. The jack boots were for marching and for when they're at the front. So not only were they taking the more expensive boot route, they were also adding in low boots anyways. So they were just being extremely leather unfriendly in terms of using so much compared to what they could have been using. So instead of using the low boot and putty system that Britain, France, even Austria was using, They instead opted to have jack boots for combat duty and low boots for administrative duty, issued to each soldier. Why they did this, I have no idea. It wasn't like puttees were some invention during the war. They were standard even beforehand, and some German troops, specifically the ones in Asia, used puttees for their kit. So the German army did use puttees to some extent, the leg wraps, the Gamaschen. I did a video on it. You can find it here for how to wrap their legs in it. And so for some reason, the Germans decided to issue jack boots with puttees and low boots. Now, there was a benefit to it towards the middle of the war. See, jack boots do protect from water a lot better, more consistently, and you don't have to train soldiers on an extra step, i.e. wrapping Gamaschens properly. Britain had a specific style you had to wrap your Gamaschen, and you'd be, or the puttees if you're from Britain or America, and if you had to pass inspection wrapping them like that. That's extra training you have to do, and that's an extra step in that process. They are cheaper to manufacture though, so there's a balance to it. However, improperly wrapped puttees allowed in a lot more debris and water into the boots and into the feet, which could ruin the boots, ruin your trousers, and end up actually causing it to cost more in the long run than using a simple pair of jack boots. While puttees could go higher, that really only counts if they're properly done. And sometimes soldiers would just slack off. Puttees are extremely difficult to manage. I do a late war kit, and I have had difficulty doing it myself. A lot of information getting dumped into this, and it is extremely important because trench foot became a huge deal for the British. Whereas the Germans, there isn't a lot of evidence to show that it was a massive, all the way through their trenches problem. Now, there are a lot of people who have brought up the fact that the German trenches were much better dug, had a lot better drainage, and, well, they didn't really experience the flooding and the mud that the British experienced due to the way that they, where they were situated at. And I'd like to also argue that there were areas that were continuously flooded. In my memoirs of the 17th Reserve Infantry Regiment, they mention areas where it was literally knee-deep. And the Germans did have their own little ways to seal off the top of these. They had leather straps that soldiers would privately purchase that would seal it off from water and debris and stuff from getting into the boot itself. But they did experience heavy flooding. But the Germans did not experience trench foot to the extent that the British did. And I would like to make the argument that part of that has to do with jack boots being more standard issue than puttees were. Whereas the puttees, they would get inconsistent. They are made out of cloth, so they are going to slowly let in water if you're continuously submerged for long periods of time. And while jack boots will do the same thing, it does take longer for it to get through the leather if you have properly cared for your leather, which wasn't too difficult to do. When you're on leave, you just take care of the leather, you come back to the trenches, you don't have to do it for a while. Puttees are a daily thing you have to put on, take off, put on, take off to get that perfect seal. So there's a difference there. There's going to be those inconsistencies. That isn't entirely the reason, but I would like to make the argument that that did play a role in terms of protecting the German soldiers from trench foot, whereas the British suffered it more often than the Germans did. Now, there also hasn't been a lot said for trench foot from the French, but that might also have to do with their elevation. So it's one of those things where it's probably a multiple factor issue. The French did suffer trench foot worse than the Germans, but it wasn't as bad as the British, and that might have been due to where the British were fighting. So it's easy to see that there are multiple factors going into it, and footwear, what the soldiers were wearing, was definitely one of those factors in terms of the comfort and in terms of just how well they were able to manage the situation. In terms of economics, the Germans did eventually stop manufacturing jack boots due to the leather shortage, which got extremely bad in 1917 onwards. This is when Germany started to make a lot of ersatz material, or ersatz. I apologize to all the Germans who are watching who are cringing at every single mispronunciation I make of the German language. So they stopped making jack boots as much, and then entirely, and low boots with puttees became standard issue. There was something that I read where boots really only lasted in the trenches about 6 months on average. There were, of course, exceptions to this rule, otherwise we wouldn't have any surviving jack boots at all. And most surviving jack boots are actually ones like this, officers' jack boots. You don't really see too many enlisted man's jack boots anymore, which are the standard issue 1866 model jack boot. And the reason why is because those were more used. Officers, well, the officers who would be wearing these, This is a pair of private purchase boots that have had specific things done to it. And to be honest, it probably wasn't worn at the front too often because they were privately purchased. I do really like the look of this, just the way that it's aged and everything. They're in very good condition. So they just weren't used as often, and some people were able to private purchase boots as late as 1918, up to the end of the war. And there is a chance that these boots were actually made after the war ended, and there's really no way of knowing for sure, especially since there was a lot of private purchase items. One way you can tell sometimes is on the bottom of the boot if there's any markings, but because the boots get so worn down, the markings just kind of go away, and it's kind of hard to tell if there ever really was one. Now, what's interesting is on the bottom of these boots, the hobnails have obviously been replaced before. You can kind of see the interesting pattern on here because they've been hammered in again, and it's a very interesting piece. Now, these definitely aren't World War II or 30s boots because those boots would have a cap on the front, which, funnily enough, is what is on most reproduction World War I 1866 model boots. So that is definitely an interesting little bit of information for you. Most reproduction boots have the cap on the front, which is actually inaccurate for World War I. So you've seen a lot of these officer boots, and you've probably been viewing them for a while, and you're wondering, well, what's the comparison to a pair of enlisted man boots? While I don't have an original pair, I do have the pair that I used for reenactment. I'm currently working on getting a new pair of boots, since these ones kind of, due to Nestov's lack of quality control, this pair kind of fell apart on me a little bit, and I probably didn't treat them with enough care that I should have. So I'm going to be saving up some money to get a better pair of boots while I lose some weight and get my kit refitted. But they do make a great piece to sort of show the differences. Now this has been fit to my size foot, so the bottoms are going to definitely be a lot bigger. But you can definitely see the size difference here. There is a large difference in size. On top of that, and that's about as tall as these guys are going to get. On top of that, if you go ahead and you look on the sides here, there's a seam that goes up on this side, on both sides of the 1866 model. On officers' boots, it is seamless, and rather you have a single seam on the back going up. This is to create a more smooth look to the boot itself. It was a little bit more difficult to do and to get it properly fitted for the person and for their legs and everything, just due to the nature of, the boot itself with everything going on. You had to fit it around, whereas this was more two parts. You could easily just slap that on, slap this on, and it was a little bit easier to manufacture. But this one created a more seamless look and looked better on the soldier because of it. Now, this has been an interesting video, obviously, a bit out of style for some of my previous ones, but I figured I'd do a video about it since I did just get these boots in and I had the opportunity to do an unboxing video. So I figured, why not? I'll go ahead, get it recorded, and have a video for you guys to enjoy. And if you guys do, like, subscribe if you aren't, and leave a comment. It helps the YouTube algorithm, I think. That's what I've been told. I don't really know. I don't believe that. Yeah, there are new videos coming. I am in the works of reigniting the series Lighting the Powder Keg, pun intended. I'm actually working on the next episode right now. The script is finished up, and I'm actually going to be recording it probably sometime this weekend, and hopefully it'll be released by next weekend. No promises, though, but that should happen. Overall, these are really good quality boots, and I'm glad I was able to get them. If you guys did enjoy this video, please let me know. Like I said earlier, all the little silly stuff that every YouTuber has to say, otherwise we get put up against a wall and shot by Google. And yeah, if you guys are new to this channel, if you guys are seeing this because I posted the video on Reddit, or because you guys got recommended the video and you like the content, you want to see more, you want to get engaged in the community, there's a ton of links in the description of this video for my Discord, my Instagram, and a ton of stuff like that. The Discord has a really cool community of people who are military collectors, reenactors, amateur historians, a lot of cool stuff in there. A lot of people who know a lot about history and a lot about different subjects, and honestly a great resource to go to for you to ask questions, or if you're a knowledgeable person, to go off and answer those questions that people might have. It's a really cool community. It's been awesome to see it grow, and I'm super happy to just be a part of it. With all that said, I will catch you guys in the next episode, or in the next video, I should say. Auf Wiedersehen und tschüss, mein Kameraden.